All right, so today we're going green,
Oh, green.
but not in the usual way. We're talking about the Peruvian desert,
Mm-hmm.
one of the driest places on Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and it's turning green,
It is.
which you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
So we're going to figure out why
Mm-hmm.
and what it means for the future.
Exactly.
And we've got some fascinating research to dive into for this one. A YouTube video transcript, actually, which features some great information from NASA and the University of Cambridge.
Two leading institutions when it comes to this kind of thing.
Absolutely. So we're going to break down why this is happening, what are the causes,
Right.
what are the potential consequences, both positive and negative, and what it might mean for the region and the ecosystem there.
Yeah, it's not a simple story, let me tell you.
No, not at all. Okay, so to start off,
Right.
we need to set the scene. Just how dry is this desert?
Okay, so imagine one of the driest deserts on Earth. We're talking less than 10 millimeters of rainfall a year. That's like barely anything.
Wow.
And it stretches for like 2,500 kilometers along the Pacific coast of South America. It's huge.
From like the south of Peru all the way to Chile?
Yep, all the way to the Chilean border. And it's always been like this. Just vast expanses of sand and rock. Not much life at all.
You're talking like dunes, that real classic desert image.
Exactly. A pretty harsh environment.
So then NASA comes along with their satellites and sees something incredible.
Something unexpected, for sure.
This desert is turning green.
It is.
And this happened in just a few years.
Yeah, incredibly quickly. I mean, it really caught everyone's attention.
Rightfully so. Okay, so before we get into why this is happening,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about why it was so dry in the first place.
Okay. So there are a couple of main culprits here. First, you have the Humboldt Current. It's this cold current that flows up the coast of South America. And it basically cools the air above it. And when the air is cool,
What?
well, it can't hold as much moisture, so it reduces evaporation, and that means fewer clouds.
Then fewer clouds mean...
Less rain.
So basically this current creates this kind of like giant cooling system over the ocean.
Yeah, it's like a lid on a pot of water. It's just not letting the moisture out.
Wow. Okay, so that's the ocean side of things.
Right.
And then on the other side, you have the Andes Mountains.
Exactly. And they act like this massive wall. They block the humid air from the Amazon rainforest from reaching the coast. So you've got this moisture coming from the east,
Yeah.
and it just hits this wall of mountains.
It's a wall.
And it can't get through. So between the cold current and the mountains,
Like a double whammy.
it is. The odds of any significant rainfall on the Peruvian coast have always been really slim.
So how did we go from this hyper-arid environment to what we're seeing now?
To a greening desert. Well, NASA's technology played a huge role here. Their satellites observed a steady increase in vegetation between 2021 and 2024, and they used this tool called NDVI, which stands for Normalized Difference Vegetation Index.
Okay, so what is that? What does it do?
Well, it basically measures how plants interact with light. Healthy plants, they absorb a lot of red light and reflect a lot of near-infrared light, and NDVI calculates the difference between these two. So the bigger the difference, the more vegetation there is.
Ah, so it's not just like looking at a picture and saying, oh, it looks greener.
No, it's much more precise than that. And the NASA images showed a significant increase in those NDVI values in various parts of the Peruvian coast.
So this greening isn't like uniform across the whole coast, right?
It's concentrated in specific areas. The most affected regions, according to the data, are Piura and Lambayeque in the north, and Ica and Arequipa in the south.
So big chunks of the coast, but not everywhere.
Right. And then the University of Cambridge got involved. They actually sent research teams to these areas to get boots on the ground.
They weren't satisfied with just the satellite images.
No, they wanted to confirm what they were seeing. They took soil samples. They analyzed plant remains. And all of that confirmed that, yes, the vegetation was increasing in these traditionally arid zones.
So they weren't just seeing things from space.
Exactly. It was real.
So then the question becomes, what caused this dramatic shift?
Right. And the researchers identified two major culprits: extreme weather events.
Okay.
The first one was El Niño Costero in 2017. But this wasn't just any El Niño. It was like an amped-up version.
Super El Nino.
You could say that. The Pacific waters off the coast of Peru got unusually warm. And warmer water means...
Evaporation.
Exactly. More moisture in the air. And this led to torrential rains and really strong winds, especially in the north. There were massive floods, crops were destroyed, homes were damaged.
Sounds devastating.
It was. But out of this destruction came something unexpected. The rains were so intense and they lasted for so long that they actually kick-started plant life. Seeds that had been dormant in the desert for who knows how long suddenly had enough moisture to germinate. And these plants that are super rare in a desert environment, they started to sprout and bloom. It was like a transformation.
The desert was coming back to life.
In a way, yeah. But then we had another big event, Cyclone Yaku in March 2023.
A cyclone.
Hmm.
On the Peruvian coast, that's not something you hear every day.
It's definitely not typical. It was a surprisingly strong cyclone that hit areas like Piura and Lambayeque, which, again, are usually very dry. And the scary thing is that these kinds of events seem to be happening more often because of global warming.
Yeah, climate change is really throwing things off balance.
It is. And Cyclone Yaku brought even more torrential rain. There were more floods, rivers overflowed, cities were inundated.
It was like one extreme weather event after another.
It is. And all of this water contributed to the resurgence of vegetation. It was like the cyclone woke up these biological cycles that had been dormant for ages.
So we've got these two extreme rain events.
Right.
But it sounds like there's another factor at play here. CO2.
You got it. Increased atmospheric CO2 from, human activity and global warming.
Yeah.
It actually helps plants grow. They use it for photosynthesis.
Yeah.
And the new vegetation on the Peruvian coast is taking advantage of all this extra CO2.
Like they're feasting on it.
Yeah, you could say that. And that's one of the reasons why these plants are sticking around. They've got all the water they need from the rains, and they've got all the CO2 to help them thrive.
So you might think, hey, a greening desert. That sounds great.
Right.
More life, more plants. But that's not the whole story, is it?
No, it's not. There's a downside to all of this, and it has to do with the ecosystems that already existed in the desert.
Okay.
See, desert ecosystems are unique. They've evolved over millions of years to survive in these harsh, arid conditions, and the plants and animals that live there, they're adapted to that dryness.
They depend on it.
They do. So when you suddenly introduce a bunch of water and new plants that thrive in wetter conditions, it disrupts that balance.
It's like throwing a wrench in the gears.
Exactly. And these native species, they can't compete. Like cacti and tillandsias, those are classic desert plants, and they're struggling to survive alongside these new invaders.
And where are these new plants coming from?
Some of them are brought in by the wind from nearby areas where there's a lot of farming and gardening, so you've got all these foreign species being introduced.
And they're taking over.
They are. And that puts the native species at risk of extinction. It's a real threat.
And it's not just the plants that are affected. What about the soil?
The soil changes too. When you have these new plants growing, they change the way the soil retains moisture. And that can actually harm the native plants even more while making things even better for the invasive species.
So it's like a domino effect.
It is. It's a vicious cycle.
And what about the animals that live in the desert? How are they affected?
Well, a lot of animals, like reptiles, mammals, and migratory birds, they rely on the traditional desert plants for food and shelter. So when those plants start to disappear,
They lose their home.
they do. They lose their food source, they lose their habitat. And the scientists are predicting that many of these animals won't be able to adapt.
And what does that mean?
It means they could go extinct. There are reports that estimate that within the next 15 years, there could be a rapid decline in animal populations in the Peruvian desert. Those that can't adapt or move to more suitable areas, they'll disappear.
It's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is. And it's not just the environment that's at risk. This greening desert is also having an impact on the people who live there.
Yeah, how so?
Well, even though more vegetation might seem like a good thing for agriculture, it actually puts a strain on the water resources, which are already limited in this region. Plus, too much moisture in a desert can lead to soil salinization.
What's that?
It basically means the soil becomes too salty, and that reduces its fertility, which is bad news for farmers.
So it's like a ticking time bomb.
It is. And in the long run, this greening could actually harm agriculture. Farmers might have to switch to different crops, find new ways to irrigate their land, and that could impact their income and the local economy as a whole.
So it's not as simple as saying, oh, more plants, more food.
And not at all. And there's another potential problem. Conflicts over land use.
Oh, right. I didn't even
Yeah.
think about that.
Yeah, if people start seeing this greening desert as an opportunity to expand agriculture, you could see a rush to claim land. And that could threaten the remaining native ecosystems and put even more pressure on the water resources.
So it's a complex situation with a lot of potential downsides.
It is.
So what's being done about it? Is the Peruvian government taking any action?
They're aware of the problem, that's for sure. They know they need to do something. But so far, there's no concrete plan in place.
So what are the experts saying? What needs to be done?
Well, they're saying that Peru should look at what's happened in other parts of the world that have faced similar challenges. like the Aral Sea, for example. There have been efforts to prevent the greening of areas around the Aral Sea.
Because that was causing problems too.
Exactly. So there are lessons to be learned from those experiences. And there's also a big emphasis on international cooperation. This isn't just a Peruvian problem. The effects of this greening could spread to neighboring countries in Latin America.
So it's a regional issue.
It is, and it requires a coordinated effort to address it.
So the big question is, can Peru reverse this situation? And what other unforeseen consequences might this greening bring? It's a really fascinating and concerning case study, isn't it?
It is. It shows just how delicate these ecosystems are and how interconnected everything is. We're seeing the effects of climate change play out in a really unexpected way.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even seemingly positive changes can have negative consequences.
Absolutely. And it highlights the need to understand these complex systems and act accordingly.
All right, so let's wrap things up. We explored how the Peruvian desert is turning green because of increased rainfall from events like El Niño Costero and cyclone Yaku.
Right.
And these events are likely being intensified by climate change. But this seemingly positive change is actually posing a serious threat to the unique desert ecosystems,
It is.
to the native species, the soil, and even the people who live there.
Yeah, it's a complex story.
And it's not a simple case of environmental improvement.
No, not at all.
So we'll leave you with this thought. This situation in Peru shows us that even in the most seemingly stable environments, environmental changes can have far-reaching and unforeseen consequences. It's a reminder that we need to be aware of these interconnected systems and act responsibly to protect them.
Exactly.
Click en comentar. Sabi ko, stay subscribed.